All right, today we're diving deep into the ancient book of Leviticus, and we've got the great sage Rashi as our guide. We're going to try and decode the divine recipe for one of the most common, but also one of the most intricate rituals in the ancient temple, the grain offering.
I mean, think about it. It's a pretty wild question, right? But for the ancient Israelites, this was a huge part of their spiritual lives. Cooking for their deity, well, it wasn't about nutrition or what tastes good like we think of it. It was really all about symbolism, communication, and making a connection.
And when I say specific, I mean really specific. This wasn't some kind of creative, freestyle cooking. No, every single ingredient, every tool, every little movement was laid out and packed with meaning. So let's start with, the cookware. Let's start right at the beginning. The text mentions a few different ways to prepare these offerings, but there's one that uses a special kind of pan that gives us this amazing glimpse into the whole process. So this was called a marcheshet, and no, this was not your average nonstick frying pan. It was a deep pan, and that depth was the whole point. It let the oil pool up at the bottom instead of just coating the surface, which created a really unique cooking effect on the dough. And this is where Rashi just brings it to life. He takes this simple instruction and turns it into this sensory experience. He explains that because of the deep, hot oil, the soft dough would bubble and shift, and it would look like it was creeping or moving on its own. It gives you this incredibly vivid picture of a dynamic, almost living offering. Okay, so once the offering was cooked, it started on this carefully choreographed journey from the person who brought it all the way to the altar. You can think of it like a sacred handoff, a chain of custody that had its own very specific rules. Now, the original text is actually a little bit vague here, but Rashi comes in and clarifies the exact steps for us. First, the worshiper presents the offering. Then, they formally hand it over to the priest. And finally, the priest brings it to one specific spot, the southwest corner of the altar. This whole precise process made sure that the offering was handled with total reverence every single step of the way. Now, here's a really important point. The entire offering wasn't just thrown on the fire. The priest would take what's called the asgaratha, which means the memorial portion. It was just a symbolic fistful. This little token, which stood for the whole thing, was the part that was actually sent up in smoke as the offering to God. So you see, this system was pretty ingenious. It served two purposes at once. A small, symbolic piece went to the altar, creating what the text calls a pleasing odor to God. And you can think of that as the essence of the gift rising up to the divine. But the rest of it, that became food for the priests and their families. It was a holy meal that literally sustained the community's spiritual leaders. Okay, now we get to the real heart of the recipe, the ingredients. And just like any great recipe, there are things you absolutely have to put in and things that are completely forbidden. The two big no-nos were leaven, anything that makes dough rise and puff up, like yeast and honey. On the other side, the one ingredient that was an absolute must-have, salt. And this contrast really sets up this powerful symbolic tension between things that decay and things that last forever. And get this, when the text says honey, it's probably not what you're thinking. Rashi points out that this isn't honey from bees. It's a general term for any kind of intense, sweet fruit syrup, like date syrup or fig syrup. The whole idea was to steer clear of these really potent natural agents of fermentation and change. So that brings us to the salt. And it turns out the salt wasn't just for flavor. It was called malach brit, the salt of the covenant. And Rashi gives us this incredible backstory, that it refers to a promise made way back at the time of creation. It symbolizes something eternal, something that doesn't change. I mean, think about it. In a world without refrigerators, what did salt do? It preserved things. It stopped decay. It was the physical symbol of an unbreakable promise. And you really can't overstate how important this was. The text is crystal clear. Salt wasn't just for these grain offerings. Every single offering that was placed on that altar had to be salted. The symbol of the covenant had to be a part of every single one of these acts of connection. So we've got all these rules. How did they actually play out? Well, let's look at a really specific example, the required offering of the first fruits of the harvest. It was known as the Omer offering, and it had its own totally unique way of being prepared. So this offering came from the very first barley of the season.
And because the grain was so young and still moist, you couldn't just mill it into fine flour. So first, they had to parch it over a fire to dry it out a bit, and then they'd grind it into these coarse grits. It's a very rustic, very foundational kind of offering. The text has a very specific term for this stuff, geras carmel. And Rashi, of course, breaks down the Hebrew for us. He explains that carmel suggests something that's still full and moist, while geras means to break it or grind it. So it perfectly describes these coarse grits made from fresh, tender grain. So the final recipe card for the Omer offering looked like this. You had the coarse grits, some oil, and this amazing smelling frankincense, all of it bound together by the salt of the covenant. And there was one more unique rule for this one. Unlike other offerings where only some of the frankincense was burned, with this one, all of it went up on the altar. So we've gone through the tools, the process, the ingredients. What does it all add up to? Let's zoom out a bit and really look at the language that's being spoken through this whole divine recipe. It's like every element tells a piece of the story. The flour and oil, that's basic sustenance, the foundation of life. Banning leaven and honey, that signals a choice for purity over fermentation and decay. The frankincense, that's like a prayer, a pleasing aroma rising up to heaven. And all of it rests on the salt, that symbol of the eternal, unbreakable promise. Together, they create this complete statement of devotion. And let's not forget the very practical side of things. Yes, the offering creates a connection with the divine, but it also creates a connection right here in the community by making sure that the people who were dedicated to spiritual service were supported by the community they served. When you boil it all down, all of these different rituals, all these recipes, they all revolved around one single universal element: salt. It was the one ingredient you just couldn't skip, a constant physical reminder of that permanent, enduring covenant that was at the very heart of the entire system. You know, this ancient ritual was a way of communicating some really big ideas about purity, permanence, partnership, all through the language of food. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? Our holiday meals, our birthday cakes, even just our daily cup of coffee. If food is a language, what are our modern rituals really saying?